Satoru Gojo, Regulas Corneas, Accelerator. What do all these characters have in common? Well, they all have white hair. Their eyes represent the three primary colors. They're one of the strongest characters in their respective verse. And oh yeah, they have defensive abilities that make them virtually immune to any and all forms of harm. Vector Control, the Limitless Cursed Technique, and the Authority of Greed are extremely versatile and powerful and allow these men to take on nuclear wars without even so much as a scratch, and they can all do this with a smug grin on their faces. But this had me wondering, which defensive abilities do their best job of protecting their users, and who should truly hold the crown as the most untouchable and egotistical maniac in anime? Now I know I kinda made this video in the past, but personally, I think I didn't really do justice to these characters, and at the same time, I didn't know much about Regulus Corneas, so think of this video as a superior remake.
I'm stronger, I'm smarter, I'm better, I am better!
Anyways, let's not waste any more time, and get on with the battle. Regulus's power comes in two forms, Lion's Heart and Little King. With Lion's Heart, Regulus is able to control the time of his own body, specifically by stopping it. When the time on his heart and body is stopped, he is in turn freed from the influences of the outside world, like gravity, momentum, space, time, and especially physical contact. Because remember, if the flow of time no longer applies to his physical body, physical and non-physical forces won't be able to influence him. When this ability is active, Regulus is literally invincible and cannot be damaged by any form of attack. Sword swings, magic, explosives, all of them will be ignored. Oftentimes, the ability takes the form of a barrier-like structure that nullifies projectile attacks on contact. But even in situations where a fatal attack makes contact, his body will react, but all potential damage is nullified by Lion's Heart. It's almost like the kinetic energy from attacks are being frozen in time when they make contact with his body. This seems to be the ultimate defensive power in ReZero. Being frozen and falling hundreds of meters from the air are just some of the many things Lion's Heart has withstood. Even the shaft of his spear completely disappeared when it made contact with Lion's Heart. Still, its most impressive feat is withstanding attacks from Reinhard van Estrella, the strongest character in the ReZero universe, a man who could one-shot primordial spirits capable of destroying the entire world. Despite how powerful he is, his attacks were casually nullified by Lion's Heart, with Reinhard stating that he didn't even think his attacks were reaching him. Regulus is in turn the only one free to interact with the outside world, while external forces can only help but watch. Regulus can apply his ability to other individuals as well, making them invincible for a brief period, such as when Emilia survived a devastating fire attack when under the influence of Lion's Heart. Since Regulus is completely cut off from the world's flow of time, and has his body frozen in time, that provides benefits separate from pure defensive power. Human needs like his need to eat, sleep, go to the bathroom are all frozen in time. So are other bodily features like temperature, heartbeat, breathing, and even aging. If Regulus can stop the time of his own body, then what's preventing him from stopping the time of other objects? Well, nothing. Regulus can stop the time of objects, including anything he was wearing, touching, or his own breath. Objects imbued with Lion's Heart effectively become anomalies to the world, and thus behave violently to outside forces. Regulus' main form of attack is grabbing or kicking dirt or water towards opponents. This dirt or water will then freeze in midair and home in on a target. Once these anomalies pass through a living thing, they will immediately be shredded apart like a blender, either until they're riddled full of holes, or until there's nothing left. However, Regulus can be a lot more creative when he really tries. He launched a deadly tsunami by stomping the water in a water canal, sending it flying in a direction. The tidal wave swept everything in its course, destroying everything in its path. Regulus created a mat-like structure out of water that he could pick up with his hands by freezing water from a nearby water canal. When creating water droplets, Regulus can either walk across them like stairs, or rain them down like frozen water droplets that shred everything in their path. Bro basically thinks he's a JoJo character. Air is another conduit in which Regulus can use his ability. By swiping his hand and creating a gust of wind, Regulus can freeze it in place, effectively turning it into a wind blade, capable of slicing limbs apart. Regulus can create shockwaves with wind, which can obliterate entire caravans and one-shot powerful fighters. By inhaling and exhaling air, or even leaving a pocket of air frozen in place, anyone who makes contact with it will immediately be shredded apart, and since air is practically invisible, it's almost unavoidable. The most destructive feat with Lion's Heart is violently throwing away opponents, which may not seem too impressive until you take into account that this throwing is strong enough to launch Reinhard onto the moon itself, which truly showcases the destructive power of Lion's Heart. Despite everything we know about Lion's Heart, there's some strange things about it, such as when an entire building had its geometry changed with ease. There was something really strange going on with the building. The layout of the interior changed with each second, as if the Sin Archbishop was playing with a Rubik's Cube. This is all related to Regulus' earlier feats of creating a tsunami and deadly raindrops. Regulus is able to mold and shape any object under the influence of his ability, giving him more options in combat situations. Another example was him simply twisting his wrist, which caused an entire pillar of flames to dispel. All this showcases is that Lion's Heart may be even more versatile than what's been shown.
大丈夫でしょ。だって君、弱いもん。
The Limitless Cursed Technique comes in 5 forms: the Infinity, Blue, Red Reversal, Hollow Purple, and Unlimited Void. The neutral Infinity is the defensive part of the Limitless. Basically, Gojo's technique brings the concept of infinity into reality and uses it as a defensive barrier. When an attack reaches Gojo, it immediately stops in its tracks. This is because they made contact with the infinity. These attacks are still in a trajectory towards Gojo, but there's now infinite space or distance between Gojo and that attack. So while they're still moving towards him, they'll slow down and never reach him. Like Gojo once said, this ability functions like Achilles in the Paradox. Think of Gojo like the number 2 and an attack like the number 1. Usually, counting up from 1 would quickly be followed up by 2. But what if we added fractions in between 1 and 2? So instead of counting up to 2, you'd have to count up from 1 to 1.01, to 1.02, to 1.03, and so on. But counting like this means it's virtually impossible to get from 1 to 2, because there's now an infinite amount of fractions that now exist. This is basically how the neutral infinity works. The space between Gojo and an attack will constantly be divided for eternity, effectively making an attack impossible to reach him. There's seemingly no range in which this barrier can be applied. Even when it looks like you're touching Gojo, the Limitless Barrier will ensure that he comes out unscathed. The Limitless Barrier is passive and is on at all times, so usually sneak attacks on Gojo are impossible. This is helped by a sort of filter system the Infinity has, which is programmed to recognize every object coming towards it and automatically stops them if they are deemed a threat. There are 2 other applications of the basic barrier. First, if Gojo reinforces his Limitless with more cursed energy, it can become dense enough to vaporize cursed spirits in seconds. Gojo can levitate in the air for extended periods of time, likely by creating distance between him and the air underneath his feet. Blue is Gojo's main form of attack. It's achieved through Gojo amplifying his Limitless with more cursed energy. Gojo uses this to bring impossibilities to life, for example, negative distance or -1 apples. Since situations like these aren't supposed to exist, the universe will get confused and will force the surrounding space to converge in order to fill it up, which results in everything in the surrounding area to get sucked in as well. This gives Gojo the power of attraction. Depending on where it's used, Blue's suction-like force can cause opponents to violently collide with each other or collide with other objects. Gojo can offensively use Blue to force enemies towards him to close the distance, lift rubble off the ground and throw it as if he has telekinesis, or cause an object to violently implode in on themselves, which may be the most deadly technique with Blue. By pouring in a ton of cursed energy, Gojo can create Azure Glow, a black hole-like sphere which sucks in everything in its path, which Gojo can also control. It's powerful enough to destroy an entire mansion with ease. For movement purposes, Gojo can speed himself up with Blue, which allows him to overwhelm most opponents and grants him the record for the fastest sorcerer alive. But this speed doesn't really matter with his ability to instantly teleport. By clasping his hands together, Gojo can use Blue to teleport in an instant and even teleport others. It is said to have limitations, but this teleport ability has shown itself to come in handy in certain situations, such as when he's teleported from the bottom of a trench to the surface near instantaneously. Gojo not only has the power to attract, but the power to repel as well. By infusing positive cursed energy into Blue, Gojo creates Red Reversal, a red sphere which concentrates around Gojo's hands, which when makes contact with opponents, violently blasts or repels them away. The speed of red is high enough that both Toji and Sukuna are unable to dodge at point blank range. Mind you, Sukuna was able to avoid a meteorite seconds before it hit the ground, but couldn't react to Red Reversal in time. Red Reversal is stated to output twice the energy of blue, being strong enough to cause a shockwave in a forest and blow half of Sukuna's face off. The size of red can be controlled, which likely increases its power, at least enough to one-shot grade 1 level cursed spirits. But red sorta acts as a way for Gojo to create some distance with opponents when things get heated. When Gojo combines the pushing of red with the pulling of blue, an imaginary mass is created, called Hollow Purple immediately erases everything it touches upon contact, whether it be a cursed spirit or a gifted human, and despite its size, it can move surprisingly fast, catching even the King of Curses off guard. This is an ability barely even known to members of the Gojo clan, and for good reason. Unless your name is Ryomen Sukuna, one direct hit from this thing will erase you from existence, special grade or not. Gojo's most impressive feat with his ability is 200% Hollow Purple, a move which can destroy several city blocks in seconds, although this attack normally isn't possible without the help of an output increasing curse technique. The final aspect of the Limitless Cursed Technique is Unlimited Void, a domain expansion which covers a wide radius. Those who are caught within Unlimited Void have their brains flooded with an infinite amount of information. This overwhelms the brain and makes one unable to move for several seconds. Unlimited Void can be dispatched in 0.2 seconds, which can still flood the brain with enough information to incapacitate enemies for several seconds.
そうか、君がアクセラレータ君だね。
お前か、俺に喧嘩売りてえってやつ。
Accelerator's expert ability of vector manipulation pretty much makes him the living embodiment of the concept of physics. Accelerator controls vectors, a quantity in physics that accounts for the magnitude and direction of an object. The direction accounts for any object moving from point A to B, like a car backing out of a driveway, a door opening or closing, or a pencil moving across a piece of paper. The magnitude is the amount of energy required for these objects to move that set distance. A vector quantity can pretty much be found everywhere and on everything in the universe, and is a fundamental aspect of our understanding of physics. This is the force Accelerator controls with his Esper ability. His ability comes in two forms, his reflection barrier and vector control. The reflection barrier does what the name implies. It reflects and redirects any attack thrown his way. There are three ways the barrier has been utilized. The first is simple deflection. When an opponent attacks the barrier, that said attack is redirected back to them or another area. This is regardless of the attack's speed and power, because like I have mentioned before, if they have vectors, they can and will be reflected. Even attempting to punch him will cause your hands to snap backwards. This method ensures that those who attack Accelerator will have their attacks backfire and hit them instead, even if Accelerator didn't intend to. The speed in which the attack was sent will also be reflected back at the same velocity. The second is attacks simply bending around him, like repelling magnets. The third is objects or attacks smashing into it like a brick wall. Accelerator accounts for many things with its reflection barrier, like light, radiation, water, gravity, air, speed, and maybe misfortune? Anyways, this all adds up to a filter system that immediately accounts for any threats and will redirect them if it is deemed necessary. Since pretty much everything on Earth has vectors, there's almost nothing the reflection barrier can't redirect. Range doesn't seem to matter, even if an explosion or trap were to completely envelop Accelerator's body. The reflection barrier can control vectors at an atomic scale, which results in him getting out of these situations unharmed. Accelerator himself can control where a reflected attack goes, allowing him to pull off some pretty cool maneuvers. Accelerator can take control of any vector that is present in an object with his vector control. Here are some examples. When Accelerator touches a box of bottles, they can launch towards opponents like a machine gun. Tapping on a train track can force the screws out of their sockets as they twist and contort. He can physically grab plasma and throw it back at opponents. He can turn a pebble into a bullet by kicking it. Wind can be condensed enough to physically lift people up or blow people a good distance away. And speaking of wind, he can condense it enough to create a ball of plasma large enough to destroy several city blocks, penetrate nuclear bunkers, and by his own admission, maybe even destroy the world itself. The size of the object Accelerator attempts to control is irrelevant, such as when he lifted an entire building out of its foundations and then chucked it at a windowless building. Except this is not what happened in the light novel. What Accelerator actually did was borrow the rotational energy from the Earth, converted it into a concrete wall, and chucked it at that same windowless building. This resulted in it cutting through several buildings like butter. For at least one day, the rotation of the entire Earth was slowed by 5 minutes. Which means if he really wanted to, he could stop the rotation of the Earth altogether. And if any of you have seen the ending of Persona 2, that would cause everything not nailed to the ground to be instantly vaporized. Despite this feat, Accelerator has more simple ways of fighting most opponents. Accelerator likes to stomp on the ground, which causes it to explode, and blow away anyone in its path. He can also stomp to create a mini earthquake, capable of affecting a wide radius, and if he really wanted to, he could create a casual dust explosion, which obviously he survives. Hell, Accelerator doesn't even need to physically touch an object for them to be affected by vector control. It's almost like he has telekinesis with the way he can make objects into projectiles. Pretty much anything can become a deadly weapon with his vector control. The vectors of objects aren't all he manipulates. He can control his own vectors, causing him to launch himself at high speeds in any direction, which allows him to close the gap in fights or simply catch up with high-speed vehicles. But what an opponent should be afraid of is Accelerator touching them. 3 things he can do is either increase your blood's magnitude and direction, causing your body to explode, increase the magnitude of your body's bioelectricity, causing you to get electrocuted, or rewire your brain by controlling the vectors of your brain cells and neurons, but this requires 100% concentration. Finally, Accelerator possesses a pair of black wings. They first of all destroy any piece of matter they come in contact with, and with their ability to extend their range, it's bad news if an opponent makes contact with them. Second of all, they can perform all his calculations. And third of all, these have at least been implied to control the vectors of anything they touch. Accelerator later evolved to get angel-like white wings, capable of healing his injuries, and helped him nullify a magic nuke, capable of destroying Eurasia. So we've now established the ability sets of all 3 prodigies. Now it's time to see what would happen if they collided in an epic battle. Results in 3, 2, 1. Well, the results are in, and it looks like nothing happened. Lion's Heart, Limitless, and Vector Control are all ultimate defensive abilities that are not only passive in nature, but have no obvious weaknesses right off the bat. No matter what basic attacks they throw each other's way, they'll either be stopped, reflected, or nullified. So if all 3 characters don't have any way of surpassing each other's defensive barriers, then maybe it's time to focus more deeply on their individual weaknesses and how they can be exploited. With that in mind, round 2 begins in 3, 2, 1. So it looks like Regulus was the first one to go, but how could that be? We've established that he's powerful enough to blast people to the moon, and his ability to stop time on his body and objects gives him the ultimate defense in the world of ReZero. Well, it all comes down to Regulus' second ability, Little King. You see, Regulus has one huge handicap, and that is, Regulus can normally only use Lion's Heart for 5 seconds, and any more than that will cause extreme pain and his heart to rupture, resulting in an agonizing death.
What?
I know, this seems like a pretty horrible handicap, but these downsides are negated by his second ability, Little King. With it, Regulus can share a small piece of his heart with anyone he considers his subjects, or his wives, in a domain coined his Little Kingdom. Once a wife shares his heart, the time limit on Lion's Heart is eliminated, allowing him to use the ability freely. He also no longer has to turn it on and off, and it will be on at all times. And it's been implied that as long as Regulus' wives stay within a certain range, the ability will still function. But if the wives were to die, or lose Lion's Heart in some way, the 5-second time limit would return. So as a bit of insurance, Regulus unfroze the riz in his body, and got himself over 200 wives. Not only does this make it difficult to find the heart among the crowd, but Lion's Heart can then switch to a new wife if the previous holder were to die. An added bonus is that oftentimes, people won't even know that the wives are related to his ability. So why exactly would Regulus lose? Well, his wives may not seem too obvious at first, but think about it. Gojo can easily deduce a connection with his 6 eyes. The 6 eyes are an optical ability that not only perceive information at supercomputer-like speeds, but can read cursed energy at an atomic scale. If we adjusted the power a bit and assume the 6 eyes can now see and analyze mana, Gojo would easily be able to see the connection between Regulus' ability and an unknown factor. Tracing these normally invisible connections would lead him back to Regulus' wives, and upon figuring out the correlation between Regulus and the wives, all it would take was one good hollow purple to erase them all from existence. Gojo isn't above innocence dying for the greater good. It wouldn't be too difficult for him to cross that line. With Gojo's weaknesses of domain amplification, domain expansion, cursed technique burnout, and cursed technique nullification, Regulus' ability to stop time for himself and objects not only can't exploit these weaknesses, but Regulus wouldn't be able to reach Gojo due to the infinite space between them. So sorry Regulus, you're unfortunately the first to go. We've officially moved on to round 3, the strongest Esper in Academy City versus the strongest modern day sorcerer. Let's see who comes out on top. Since Gojo was the one who did the killing blow to Regulus, we'll give him a bit of an advantage and let him know Accelerator's weaknesses. 1. Accelerator will sometimes need to take down his reflection barrier in order to do a complex task, like rewiring someone's brain, which leaves him vulnerable to outside forces. 2. The Imagine Breaker is a force which nullifies any and all supernatural phenomena, which means Accelerator is vulnerable to getting hit. 3. If an attack somehow doesn't follow the laws of physics, or operates under laws we don't know about, the filter will have a harder time reflecting them. 4. It's possible to hit Accelerator if you manage to hit the spot his shield begins to manifest. 5. The Kiara counter can bypass the barrier by pulling back a punch right before the filter calculates an upcoming attack, basically taking advantage of a small opening. Although this method was only pulled off by someone who not only knew the ins and outs of vector manipulation, but spent several years perfecting the technique. Of all these weaknesses, Gojo can exploit at least 2 of them. The first is the Kiara counter. How, you may ask? Well, there's 2 main reasons. 1. The 6 eyes being like a supercomputer can help Gojo pull off the precise timing. 2. Gojo has pulled off a black flash in the past, a technique which also has an extremely small window of success. The second exploitable weakness is weakness number 3. Hollow Purple has been described as an imaginary technique that kinda breaks the laws of physics, with its combination of the laws of pushing and pulling. Theoretically, Gojo may be able to bypass the filter, like Kiine's dark matter, which also functions under its own laws. So there you have it, the so-called strongest sorcerer has achieved victory. Sorry Accelerator, but it appears like Take everything I just said and throw it in the trash, because Accelerator will demolish both Regulus and Gojo with shocking ease. Why? Well, because Accelerator is just far too powerful for either of them to deal with. There are 2 aspects of his character that support this, his intellect and his platinum wings. Accelerator's brain is like that of a supercomputer. Every vector you've seen him control or reflect required him to make galaxy brain level calculations in real time. He had to take many things into account, like air resistance, gravity, and obstacles, in order for them to function properly. These calculations are often made in the heat of battle, especially when he's under fire, which means Accelerator can react to and reflect objects moving at bullet speed or higher. Sure, Regulus isn't dumb and Gojo's known as a prodigy, but neither of them can really stand shoulder to shoulder with Accelerator. A lot of Gojo's feats with the Limitless is thanks to his 6 eyes, which admittedly does 70% of the work. Without it, I highly doubt Gojo would have pulled off a lot of the feats we've seen in this series. Accelerator doesn't need the 6 eyes or any fancy tools like that to do his calculations. The choker isn't a sign of weakness, it's a symbol that tells all the denizens of Academy City that he's him. As for Regulus, his intellect is pretty average. But what about Hollow Purple? An attack which some say can hurt Accelerator due to the fact that it has been described as an imaginary mass, and thus can bypass the reflector shield. Well, let's take a quick look at Kiine's dark matter. Dark matter is a force in the index world that doesn't actually exist. It's more of a theoretical substance than an actual physical element. Because dark matter technically doesn't exist, it also operates under physics that don't exist, giving it unknown vector quantities, meaning Accelerator wouldn't be able to properly reflect them. But after 2 or so minutes of fighting, Accelerator learned the vectors of an imaginary substance and therefore was able to control them. With that said, the effectiveness of Hollow Purple would be short-lived. Gojo would need to rely on a surprise attack, which he's capable of doing, but I doubt we're gonna find Accelerator lacking anytime soon. But not all is in vain. Gojo still has an ability that could potentially defeat Accelerator. The infinite info dump of Unlimited Void would incapacitate Accelerator for several seconds, giving Gojo ample time to demolish him. There's no evidence that Accelerator would be capable of reflecting infinite information, especially if he didn't know it was coming. As for Regulus, each of his attacks, including his wind attacks and dirt bullets and more, are all physical strikes moving from point A to B with magnitude, giving them vectors, which allows Accelerator to use them to his advantage. With vector manipulation, Accelerator was able to halt an attack, which was stated to have enough energy to destroy all of Academy City. He then proceeded to launch his attack instantaneously into the vacuum of space, but all this pales in comparison to his feats accomplished with his platinum wings. Okay, so this is gonna get a little confusing, so stay with me a bit. In the world of Index, there exists a magical concept, known as the Tree of Sephiroth and the Tree of Clipoff. These trees possess 10 orbs and 22 branches, which contain different qualities of God that comprise all of existence, and ranks and divides many beings like magic gods, humans, and angels based on their closeness to such a god. This tree is a metaphysical concept that governs the state of the world, its phases, and its knowledge. What if I told you that Accelerator managed to insert another artificial tree into the universe called the Tree of Clonoth? which is derived from the Mysica network. This was done with the help of Clipper Puzzle 545, an artificial demon who made a contract with the whale of the Mysica network and collaborated to manifest the Mysica network, also known as Clonoth, into the physical world. Accelerator then took this artificial tree, used it to manifest his platinum wings, and proceeded to manipulate the concept of macroism and microism, embedding Clonoth into the physical world, which resulted in an entire freaking galaxy shaking. Accelerator then channels the energy of the shaking galaxy into a physical strike that forces the soul of a reality-destroying demon out of his physical body. Another way he used his platinum wings was using Clonoth to manifest conceptual invisible spheres, which was used to attack a magic god and halted their ability to heal. Remember, magic gods are beings who are able to control the fabric of reality. And finally, with platinum wings, Accelerator was able to deflect one of Choronzon's magic attacks, an attack which was stated to not only have infinite speed, but was compared to Othnes' Gungnir, a weapon which has the ability to shatter layers of reality, which means that Accelerator, with his platinum wings, can deflect attacks with infinite speed and universal AP. When taking a look at Gojo and Regulus, they aren't weak by any means. Both are known as one of the strongest characters in their respective verse. Their defensive abilities are almost unbreachable and make them virtually untouchable from all forms of harm. But when face to face with a man who can literally shake the galaxy and tank reality-breaking attacks, there's nothing in their arsenal that can remotely hurt him, except maybe Unlimited Void. Gojo at most can destroy a mountain, and Regulus could probably destroy a good chunk of the earth, but a fight with Accelerator would simply come down to whose defensive ability would hold out the longest against One-Way Road. Once again, it's no wonder he's been described as one who wields the power of God.
True. My power has diminished somewhat. I may even need to step down as this city's top dog. And yet here I am. As long as the kid's around, for some reason, I'm still determined to act like top dog. Damn it all.